Okay. And so Stony Lonesome is also out on Highway 46, and you won't even know that you've gone through Stony Lonesome except there's the sign that says Stony Lonesome. But you're kind of going up through the hills of Brown County now. As a matter of fact, I always tell people I'm from actually about the only really hilly part of Indiana. And from a musical standpoint, the great thing about growing up there was, as you keep on going out 46, you come to Nashville, Indiana, in just a very few miles. And in Nashville, Indiana, the road tees, and you have to go left or right. If you go left, you go to Bloomington, Indiana. And matter of fact, now, if you turn left there, that is 46 turns left. You, in about 4 or 5 miles, you're going to run past John Mellencamp's house and recording studio. It's a really musically rich area. So John lives right there. The Little Nashville Opry was there on the right for years and years. It burned down a few years back. But at that intersection there of Highway 46, you're now in Nashville, Indiana, and which is home to scores of professional artists. And in fact, there's an entire school of art called Brown County Art. My dad was a collector of Brown County art, and I have several pieces.
Very interesting. Wow,
yeah.
That's a lot of rich
Oh,
culture.
very, very much so. And my dad especially collected an artist named Trover. So I have several Trover things that Trover did with a palette knife.
That is pretty cool.
So you turn right, and you'll go through the town of Nashville, Indiana. And as you come on out of that, you're going to climb it. That's Highway 135, actually going back towards Morgantown and eventually Indianapolis. But as you go up that road, you're going to come to a town that's become world famous called Bean Blossom.
Bean Blossom.
Right. It's right there. So I grew up right by Bean Blossom. And now I was born in 1955. So I was like 10, 11 years old before they had Bill's Festival or festivals anywhere.
Oh, I see. So
yeah.
Okay, so you're really right there at, the very beginning of his.
Yeah, and he had bought that place. He bought a place up there in Bean Blossom in the early 50s called the Brown County Jamboree. And my dad, who was a musician, played guitar and sang and had radio shows and stuff up there. Before.
Oh, so now it's all coming together. It was in the house.
It was in the house, and he used to play on the Brown County Jamboree on Saturday nights.
And we drag you out there. And
oh yeah, before my time even.
Brothers and sisters, I presume.
I have one brother,
okay,
and he's actually a heart surgeon.
Oh, okay.
But he plays guitar. You know, he's got a Fender Stratocaster and all that. So he played, but he didn't pursue it as a profession like I did. But I was very fortunate in that my dad had we had 6 guitars in the house. We had 4. We had like a Martin D18.
So you were just playing all the instruments, just anything you could grasp a hold of.
Exactly. We had 2, like what people would now call lap steels.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Which was actually
like
my
the
first
Hawaiian style.
That's 6 string, and then we had a piano and an organ.
Okay.
A Conn organ. Dad went to town to buy a Hammond organ, and Dad, being a machine tool dealer and something of a trader at heart, trader with a D, trader at heart. I went with him on a Saturday morning. He said, "We're going to go get us an organ," you know. And I said, "Well, that'd be cool." So we went to the organ place.
Yeah, right there in the mall or wherever they had it back then.
Right in kind of in a big old house in
I see,
in Columbus, right off of Washington Street. And the guys, it was called Newbies, as a matter of fact. I hadn't thought of that in years, but anyway. So we went to buy a Hammond organ. Yeah. And a Hammond organ was whatever it was, $1,000 or something. But they had just taken in in trade from a gigantic church in town, a Conn double keyboard, 32-foot pedal, big stereo, what we would now think of as a Leslie speaker cabinet, but it was the speaker next to it. Yeah, speaker cabinet. Well, Dad saw that and said, "Well, heck, there's a whole lot more to that than there is a Hammond organ. I want that." Yeah. So he bought that and we brought it out. They delivered it out to the house. So I grew up in a house with 6 guitars, the 2 steels, a great old piano, and then a Conn organ with 2 keyboards and foot pedals and all that. And then we had every other manner of mom had an accordion. My mom played keyboards. So as a kid, people, all of us, one of the most often asked questions is, how old were you when you first started? And my honest answer is, I do not know.
You're right.
Because I do not remember ever a time that I was not playing music.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was so on fire to want to learn how to play. In fact, there's an old family picture of my dad playing. I have to be less than a year old, and Dad's sitting there playing.
That's great.
Yeah, playing a Gibson archtop.
Big
guitar.
Eyes looking at him. Yeah.
I got both hands reaching out, trying to grab a hold of it.
That is fantastic. When did the professional career start?
Okay. What happened was I started playing. I was so little that my first instrument was those lap steels.
Okay.
And, because I couldn't make my hand wasn't even big enough to make an F chord on an acoustic guitar. So I did play a couple years on the lap steel, and then started getting my dad's guitars out of the case while he was at work selling machinery all over Indiana and Kentucky, and then putting it back before he got home, and listening to records. We had tons of records.
That is
I'll tell you one thing I should mention too, because over time you reflect on, I wonder why I like this, or I wonder what made this kind of music really strike something in my heart, my soul. When I was born, my dad had gotten drafted. And so my mother and my dad was an only child. His dad, my grandfather, paternal grandfather, was from Kentucky, and he had moved up to Indiana I always tell it, in fact, it's in one of my songs that I wrote a few years back about, because it's a true story.
Yeah.
That literally what they would do from Kentucky, Highway 31 was the big road coming out of Kentucky. And so he was from Jamestown, Kentucky, and he got over to Highway 30. Of course, nobody had cars, but unless they had some money back then.
Right, yeah.
He got over to Highway 31 in the 20s and got a ride going north on 31, and they literally, and I think, actually, as I think about this more, he had borrowed a car from somebody down there, because I remember him now telling about, he would just kept driving north, and they're on Highway 31. Yeah, I almost think of this like the guys in the Conestoga wagons, Jim, because for one thing,
interesting,
they had no idea. I keep saying they, it was him by himself.
Okay.
Had no idea where he was going.
Just on faith that we're going to land in the right spot, and this will be it, and plant roots.
And the thing that's in my song which is in the chorus of it, because it's so true, and I think yet so and powerful as well, is that he said, I would just drive till I saw smokestacks off in the distance. And that would mean, there's factories over there. They might be hiring.
Well, that is very interesting.
And he says, so I would get off and go over there, and say, hi, my name is, his name was Lonzo Duncan. Lonzo Reuben Duncan. Lonzo Reuben Duncan. And are you hiring?
Yeah.
And he eventually had to go all the way to Franklin, Indiana, which is almost Indianapolis. Again, this is kind of interesting to people who know about industry up in that part of the country. He got hired at a company called Indiana Pump and Tube. They made 2 parts for the Model T Ford. 2 parts. Indiana Pump and Tube. He was their first or second full-time employee under than the 2 guys who started.
Wow.
That company is now Arvin Industries.
Oh, so
they later on, if you have a catalytic converter, you can blame Arvin Industries for that. They invented the catalytic converter. All my family in Columbus worked at Arvin at one time or another. I think my dad worked there actually, I guess in the automotive division, and some of the guys that I grew up playing music with, they either worked at Arvin or Cummins back then. So anyway,
there was probably a pretty good likelihood that would have been your fate had you not picked up an instrument, I presume.
It would have been something in the everything up there was automotive related in the industry. So anyway, Dad was in Okinawa, of course, 55 war long over, even the Korean War was over, but so he's over there. And so my mother and I are living with my dad's mother and father. So my paternal grandparents, they were huge music fans. And my grandmother loved Bill Monroe.
Oh, so
She had
it
every.
was almost predestined
It
that you were going to wind up
it really
playing with him.
it was, and so ironically, she had all the 78s, which I now have. All the Bill Monroe Columbia 78s, she had all those. Only had one of the Decca ones, which he switched in 1950.
Okay.
And that was the one with On the Old Kentucky Shore on one side, and the other side is Poison Love. But my grandfather, he liked Bill, but he loved Roy Acuff.
Oh, I see. Because
between
Roy's so much the
Exactly.
funny guy, the entertainer.
Yeah.
You know.
And
And of course the opera. He was there.
I ended up playing with both of them.
Oh, that is fantastic.
Yeah. So I think a lot of it had to do with the fact of what I heard as a baby, and I think that's true for everybody. Is the music that's going in the house, and they were huge music fans.
Uh-huh.
And then my mother was listening, because they actually made this a kind of a side note, but of interest, I think. I was born in 1955. They made the last 78 RPM record in 1955.
Wow.
After that, everything went to either LPs or EPs, which extended plays, which was 4 songs, or what we later know as 45s.
That is amazing.
Song on each side, you know. But so anyway, so I had that as a baby, and then when he came back from the service, naturally, we moved out and lived in Columbus, and lived a year. And he actually went to college. I can remember that on the GI Bill.
Okay.
Between the time I was 3 and 5, we lived in Fort Wayne, Indiana. He went to school up there, and then came back 1 year in Indianapolis, and then back to Columbus until I graduated from high school. But so my musical thing was, again, starting on the lap steel, moved to the acoustic guitar that he had, and then I eventually, got him to buy me an electric guitar. And then at some point, he had, as I got older, he had 2,000 records. The man was he was a record hound, because the whole time he was traveling.
I presume you listened to every one of those records.
Listened to all of them, and just tons. And there was a really cool thing that, and he would go to record stores and buy discounted records.
Okay, just to keep the collection going, and more and more and more.
Exactly. And Columbia used to put out these samplers, Columbia Records, and on every sampler would be a Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs song.
Ah, and this is obviously,
oh yeah,
something's going on here now.
Big time. And
that really turned your head a little bit.
That in a big way, and it was the instrumentals. It was Earl's instrumentals. One of them was Sally Ann off the banjo album, and the other one was John Henry, open detuning off the banjo album.
Now, Glenn, I don't mean to interrupt, but when you first started hearing, of course, Flatt and Scruggs, and of course, Monroe and stuff, they were nearby, but did you see that yourself playing with these cats? Did you know that was going to happen somehow?
What's so funny is with Earl, the minute I heard that banjo, it was electrifying to me. It was like, I have to learn how to do that. I must.
Fantastic.
So I must. There was no choice. It was like, I'm going to do that. And so, if Dad hadn't bought me a banjo, I would have got my grandpa to buy me one. And but Dad bought me a banjo, so I started playing the banjo. And before the Earl Scruggs book actually came out, but the Scruggs book eventually came out. But there's an interesting thing here. This is going to come full circle in a second here, and it answers your question about did I see myself playing with those guys. I always did. I always thought, and in fact, what had made me want to play the lap steel at all was we had gone to a country music show. We went to all the country shows that came to town. Okay. And at Bill Monroe's Park, of course, this is pre-festival. Right. Every Sunday from about Easter up through to cold weather, every single Sunday there would be a major country act would be at Bill Monroe's Brown County Jamboree. Yes. In the barn. This all comes full circle again in a really incredible way here in a bit, as Bill Monroe would say, as the story comes on down, you see. So we would go over there. In fact, when we got out of church on Sunday, the first thing Dad would do would be drive down Washington Street. And, of course, I know all this now. Didn't know it at the time. But Bill Monroe's brother, Birch Monroe, older brother, lived in Martinsville over there, and he would put out these old time. Now we know the Hatch show prints.
Yeah, right.
Okay, that's what these were, and he would put them in a bookstore window on Washington Street called Cummins Bookstore. So it would say appearing, today,
right?
Literally, 2 shows. That was also another thing, it was a matinee. They called that first show a matinee, and then a night show or an evening show. And so we saw everybody. We saw the Glazer brothers. We saw the Louvin brothers.
Oh, fantastic.
We saw, Fiddle and Arthur Smith, which was cool to me. But all these, and tons, about everybody. Every Opry star, Jim and Jesse a bunch of times. And all this. So all this was going on. But we had gone to the Crump Theater, which is still there in Columbus. I think it's the oldest continuously operated movie theater in Indiana. It's really cool theater. It's right in downtown Columbus. And we had seen Ray Price and the Cherokee Cowboys, and I saw Buddy Emmons.
Fantastic.
I saw him play the steel guitar, and that's the first time I remember. I'm really little. I'm 7.
But kind of being musically starstruck a little bit.
From that moment right then, it was what do you want to do?
It was a very serious thing.
I want to be a musician, a professional musician.
Absolutely.
That's what I was going to be from the moment. And what's really cool, I got to be really good friends with Buddy, and I told him many times, but I told him over and over again, that I saw him play the steel guitar, and that's when I knew I wanted to be a musician. And part of it, Jim, was Buddy had such a mastery of what he was doing, and there was so much soul and blues. And as I listened to him play, with the years that, we've developed over these years, what I hear too is the dynamics of loud and soft, where there's so much feeling in the way you play. And that just drew me in. So we went steel, then we went through the electric guitar phase, and in the electric guitar phase, I literally wanted to be, Keith Richards or Jimmy Page. I was big into British rock, and then also I started playing the piano and organ in rock groups, and there was only one other kid in our whole area who was playing keyboards. So again, I was already like professional musician, because my whole goal at this point was, I want to be a quote unquote full-time musician. That's what I was after.
Yes, sir.
That was my goal in life. I want to be a professional musician, and I want the profession. I wanted to think of the profession of being a musician in exactly the same way as a person would think about, I went to law school or I went to medical school, and I wanted the profession. I wanted to learn.
It wasn't just to chase a big party.
Oh, no. That's just a fringe benefit I found out about later. That's just one of those things that works out way better than you think it's going to. So then the Earl thing had come along, and I was playing the banjo seriously studying the banjo. And then when I was a teenager, he put out the first copy of his edition, is what I'm trying to say. First edition of his Earl Scruggs banjo book, which is fantastic.
And that was the pivotal point.
It's the Bible.
Still kind of, I see. It's one of those. Okay.
Yeah, and then and we're going to come back to that book in a little while too, when I show how all this goes full circle. And it's an amazing thing to me how it does. So then we have Earl and the Earl Scruggs banjo book. That's got me playing banjo now, and it gets me back to liking
the grass and all that.
Because I had gotten to where I did. And here's why. I know in my own mind, I never knew a time in my life when I didn't know Bill Monroe and I didn't see him play. So that was not as big an attraction to me as it was to hear on the radio
this hot cat.
Bob Dylan doing "Lay Lady Lay," which was fantastic. And it was magic to me. And Earl playing the banjo was magic to me. And then so there's several rock records I'd like to mention, because these are all when I'm about 14. It's all 4 of these albums, actually 5, came out in the space of a few months. And again, I know that now.
Okay.
Didn't know that then, but they were hugely influential to the way, and I still love them, still listen to them. And that was 2 albums by the Rolling Stones: Beggar's Banquet, then Let It Bleed. Yeah. And that's the ones that have everything from, You Can't Always Get What You Want, and Give Me Shelter, and Monkey Man, incredible stuff, and Salt of the Earth, and all that, Sympathy for the Devil, and all that stuff on the Beggar's Banquet album. Those 2 records by the Stones, and then 2 albums. And again, these albums came out back to back. Those albums, Beggar's Banquet came out, then Let It Bleed came out. And then by the band, Robbie Robertson and Levon and everybody. The Brown album, and then Stage Fright, those 2, and then Bob Dylan's Nashville Skyline album.
Yeah.
It was those 5 albums, and they're still like pretty much the center of my universe now. I mean,
fantastic.
I added, of course, like everybody, who was an electric guitar player my age. I mean, we loved Led Zeppelin because I loved Jimmy Page's playing, and I had been listening to him on the Yardbirds records before there was Led Zeppelin. So I was listening to Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page. But the interesting thing is, on electric guitar, everything was British rock, and then there was the banjo,
which was not very British.
I know, yeah, and at that time, not very rock. It's so interesting. And then, so interestingly enough, I'm at my grandparents' house because when I was a freshman in high school, I was also playing baseball, and I was on the baseball team, the junior high baseball team, and injured my left ankle before the first game, which probably turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me because I had to spend 6 weeks off that leg.
It was time to practice.
Buddy. And so my mother would take me to my grandparents' house every day, and because I had to I had really trashed my left ankle. And so I had to do this regimen of stuff to my left ankle for 6 weeks. Well, for that whole 6 weeks, I was there. Of course, my grandfather retired by then. So, I mean, we just played records all the time. Okay. In that period of time, I heard, because I want to listen to banjo stuff, because I was into the banjo. So we came upon the Stanley Brothers record of Little Maggie. It's the Stanley Brothers. Carter's on there playing guitar, but the whole record really is, and I will say this, there are a few records that I could name, and of course there's many more, if we really thought, we'd think of a lot more, but there's a few records that are it is a perfect record. And what I mean by that is everything about the instrumentation not only was perfectly played, but more importantly, and Jim, our life is this. We do this, and we're so lucky that we do this.
Absolutely.
But the great thing about session work and studio work is those magic moments when everything comes together and everybody is playing as one. And we've developed the system here, ever since the 40s here in Nashville.
It's a friendly give and take. And
you're listening to the other guy, and he does something, and then you do something that complements that.
Absolutely.
And you're working with a great artist.
Even between songs.
That's right! That's as much fun as it gets, actually.
Yeah.
And everything about that record is perfect, but here's another thing. And when I say a perfect record, Bill Monroe's original record in the 1950 record of Uncle Pen is another one. Everything about that is perfect, I think. Bill Monroe's record of Sally Gooden, with Berline, Vic Jordan, James Monroe, who was his son, who was a fantastic bluegrass bass player and doesn't get the credit he deserves because so fantastic. Often, people think of everybody in one way.
Talk about a shadow.
That's you hit the nail on the head. But he actually, his bass playing was just as good as you can play in a bluegrass context. In fact, everybody should study James Monroe's bass playing on the Gold Rush. Because if you want to know how to play the Gold Rush, and nobody else ever sounds like that record of the Gold Rush, and it's because the bass, he doesn't play the fifth. He plays root, octave up, root, octave up, root.
Fantastic.
And things like that that we're going to get into as we go along through this series that we're putting together for people, so that they can learn about this music and learn more about this music.
That is fantastic. I look forward to that.
Oh, yeah.
I know these people do as well.
Yeah. And so Little Maggie just said, there's something about the sound of that record. It's just a sound. And, the thing about records, and I've thought back to this a lot over the years as we've made thousands and tens of thousands now of recordings. 12, 15,000, who knows how many, thousands and thousands we've made. And there is something that happens where sometimes the sound of a record, it's the way the whole record hits you. And that's one of the things that we learn how to do. And I've always tried to keep this in mind, is when I come in and listen to a playback, I'm always trying to hear it like, how will they hear it out there? They weren't here. Because I always think of recording, people ask about recording and say, what is it? What is recording? And I always say, well, recording's playing music together, and the record or the CD or the downloadable MP3 or whatever is just a way for everybody else to hear it who couldn't be here that day.
Boy, that is fantastic. And you're right about that.
That's the way, we think about it. So the sound of these records is as much a part of the magic as the way that Ralph Mayo played the fiddle on that, or Ralph Stanley sang it, and then Curly Lambert, who I got to play with later. He was in a band with me and Buddy Griffin and Melvin Gollins, who we will talk about at length at some point. Yeah. One of the true characters of bluegrass music.
I love it. Yeah.
And a member of the Bluegrass Hall of Fame now himself. Played a sock rhythm guitar. And, I always thought it was interesting because I thought there was a few sides that the Stanley Brothers did where everything sounded, I thought, boy, that is a sound. That's just the sound. Even as a kid, I could hear that, and I would hear Little Maggie and God Gave You to Me, which I found out later they recorded back to back. And I thought those just sound so much better than ever. You know what I found out later?
What's that?
They recorded them in Nashville at Star Day out on Dickerson Road.
Wow.
So there you go.
That is amazing.
I know. Nashville. So they had the best mics. They had U-47s and excellent mics that were still there when I started recording there, whatever, 25 years after that or whatever it would have been, because I think that record was made about 1960. Anyway, so Little Maggie really sets off something for me. So I'm talking to my dad, and I go, boy, we got to go see the Stanley Brothers, and I hadn't kept up on that part of it because I'm playing Beggar's Banquet and all that stuff.
Yeah, right.
And Dad goes, well, it's not Stanley Brothers anymore because Carter Stanley had passed away.
Yeah.
The very, very, very first part of '67. I said, oh, wow. And I said, well, does Ralph still play? And he goes, oh, yeah, he still plays. And I said, man, I would love to go see him. And he said, well, you're in luck. He's over here at Bean Blossom.
Which was finally happening by this point.
Oh, yeah. Oh, by then, it's going wide open. And what Bill would do is he would have an opening of the park was a big deal on a Sunday.
Okay.
And the closing of the park was a big deal. And it would really be in the barn. The big old show barn.
Yeah.
And there's tons of pictures of that barn on
just filled with people and everybody having a good time.
Wow, yeah. And he would have, so that, the bill would be Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys, Ralph Stanley and the Clinch Mountain Boys, Jim and Jesse and the Virginia Boys, and usually the Goins brothers, which is Melvin Goins we talked about a minute ago.
Yeah.
So we go over there on a Sunday a few weeks after that, and I am only there to see Ralph Stanley. That's what I'm there for.
Right.
I'm there to see Ralph. That's the long and the short of it. And in that time right there, Ralph Stanley was about the biggest thing going because Larry Sparks had come and gone as his lead singer. He had a lead singer named Roy Lee Centers, who was fabulous. And then he had a young mandolin player who sang high baritone from Blaine, Kentucky, named Ricky Skaggs.
Oh.
And he had a lead guitar player who was also the same age, within a few months younger than Ricky, who was from Sandy Hook, Kentucky, named Keith Whitley. And then he had, of course, Curly Ray Klein, who played with him for decades, and Jack Cook on bass, who played with him even longer. So we saw them. So I'm over there just to see them. So, but I mean, the Goins brothers come on. I don't remember that. Jim and Jesse come on. I don't remember that. Ralph Stanley came on, and it was everything I wanted it to be, and
fantastic.
then some.
Yeah, that changed everything. Right?
Ain't this the greatest, you know? So Monroe's getting ready to come on, and this is on a Sunday now. This is a Sunday, you know, late afternoon by now. And Dad says, "Well, you want to stay and watch Bill?" And I said, "Oh, you know, not really. You know, I said, I've been seeing him since I was a kid, you know."
Yeah.
I said, "I got to get up and go to school tomorrow and stuff, so let's not." He said, "Well, we can stay if you want to." And I said, "No, I really don't. Let's just go, you know." Okay, so we'll go. Okay, so now, and this is a movie moment. This would be a pivotal part if we were doing a movie with actors showing the progression of all this, because it is absolutely incredible, and it's how your life can change. And if you change one little tiny piece of the next 60 seconds that I'm going to talk about, my life's different. You know, my life,
it would have been entirely different.
Entirely different. I would have been a musician, you know, but I would have done something different, taken a different path. Okay, so Bill Monroe's getting ready to come on. Do you want to see Bill? No, I've seen him a million times by now, you know. Let's go. Okay, so let's go. Okay, so we're leaving. We're leaving the barn, and in the barn, it's a pretty long way, because it is a long barn. That's how it's put together. It's a long barn, and that's all it is. It's a big old barn, and there's pictures of it up on the website. In fact, I've got a picture of the last picture they took of the barn before they tore it down that I bought, and I had Bill Monroe autograph that's up on the website. Okay, so we're leaving. Okay, now there's a couple interesting things happen here. Years later, when I started playing fiddle with Bill Monroe, we always opened, always, with either the theme, which we used on the Opry, and he used for decades, called Watermelon on the Vine, which had been his theme for decades. He recorded it with his brother Charlie originally as a vocal thing, but we played that as a theme, or we came on with a song called My Sweet Blue-Eyed Darling. And if we did, and we're going to get more into this as we talk about Bill Monroe in later things on the website, we did a very set show, which was very surprising to me. You know, from watching Bill, it always just seemed, you know, kind of like a
off the cuff a little bit.
Southern blues man in his element, but very definitely it wasn't. We would do Sweet Blue-Eyed Darling, then the guitar player, singer, lead singer. You know, Bill sang most of the songs, but it's still called because he sang lead in the duets and trios and all that. So I meant the guitar player. So the guitar player would do a solo number. So it would be a big trio with a fiddle kickoff, Sweet Blue-Eyed Darling, something like Dark Hollow, solo number guitar. Then we would do banjo instrumental, Bluegrass breakdown, which we will talk about in a little while.
Yeah,
quite interesting.
That's a good story.
People are going to want to hear that. And then we would go through, you know, later into the show, he would always say, "I'm going to do a couple of solo numbers now." And then the first one goes like this right here. And he'd kick off Mule Skinner Blues. Of course, the crowd go nuts. And then he'd do Blue Moon in Kentucky. I'd kick off Blue Moon in Kentucky. Well, he would do a little mandolin lick and Mule Skinner. And then there's the big guitar G run. And then the whole thing's fiddle. You know? So, and then him singing. And it's all him and me. And the band is playing the rhythm and backing it up. And so, that's what got him on the Opry. That's the song that made him a Grand Ole Opry member in 1939. So, okay, so then Mule Skinner, Blue Moon in Kentucky. Then we would do a gospel quartet, and Uncle Pen doesn't come till after that. So, you know, maybe 8-10 songs into the program, Uncle Pen comes, because it's down there at an important part of the program. Okay. So never one time, I did several hundred shows with Bill Monroe. Never, ever did you open up with Uncle Pen. That wasn't ever going to happen.
Right.
Okay, so here's what happened on this important Sunday in my life and career. I'm over there to see Ralph.
Okay.
See Ralph do Little Maggie. Ralph does Little Maggie towards the end of his show. And Pretty Polly, which a lot of people know now from the duet with Patty Loveless and all that. Great show. Encores 2-3 times. Well, Monroe was such a competitor. You know, even though he and Ralph, by this time, were friends, it was like, this guy has come into my place and blown me off the stage.
Yeah.
And to make matters worse, when Bill came out to do his show,
they were still clapping for Ralph.
Oh, they're all over. Every single person in the place is over at Ralph and Curly Ray's,
getting an autograph,
record table, buying stuff and all, and they're leaving in droves.
That ain't
me
good.
Included.
Yeah,
with my dad. So we're clear back, and the last thing, as you were leaving the barn, there's the door.
Yeah.
On this side is some bleachers that were just there, probably as an afterthought. Bleachers over here. Few people still sitting there. Rest of this is just all folding aluminum chairs on a concrete floor. Yeah. It's hard scrabble out there.
Yeah.
And we're leaving, and we're walking, and a concession stand on the left. That's what I was going to get to. Concession stand on the left. That's the last thing you would pass, and then you're out the door. And we literally are back to the bleachers and the concession stand. We are within 30 feet of being out that door, and as soon as you went out the door, you turned and you're out of the place. We're that close to being out there, and Monroe's come on, hey, ladies and gentlemen, here he is. Of course, at that point, he wouldn't have been a member of the Country Music Hall of Fame yet. And, here he is. They were starting to call him the father of bluegrass by then. Ralph Rensler, I, of course, knew all this, found out later, but his manager in the early 60s had come up with that as a way of giving him the credit for, being the focal point of
He might not have been the king of rock and roll. We got that guy.
That's exactly right. The father of bluegrass music, exactly. And, which meant, also kind of, I started all this, and then that became a big thing as it went forward. So they'd say, the father of bluegrass music, here he is, from the Grand Ole Opry, Bill Monroe and his Bluegrass Boys. Well, they come on, with Uncle Pen. And I'm almost out the door. I see the door.
Oh, and I
can still see
that music struck you.
Let me tell you. And I hear the fiddle. I hear the fiddle. And Jim, I mean, it's like a bolt of lightning has gone through my body. I was frozen. I mean,
that is fantastic.
Oh, yeah. It wasn't even like, I think I'm going to stop and turn. It was like something had a hold of me. And I just stopped. I literally felt electrified. You hear people say the hair stood up on my arms, the back of my neck. My hair stood up everywhere. I felt like I'd grabbed onto a live wire, and I turned around and just looked at the stage, and I said, "What is that?" And my dad goes, "What do you mean, what's that?" He said, "That's Uncle Pen." He said, "You've heard that your whole life." I said,
"Not like that."
That's exactly what I said. I said, "I ain't never heard it like that." And he said, "Well, yeah." And as I stood there and watched it, and I could not believe how great the fiddle player was and how great he sounded. And he had such a quiet, he was so in charge of what he was doing.
Just assuredness as he was fantastic.
And stately, but the blues in what he did. But the tone is, the two things that really got me was the tone was so big and fat and full. And I mean, I had a fiddle by then and didn't care anything about it. Because I had only heard fiddle players who sounded bright
and shrill,
I hated that, and I didn't do nothing about that sounded good to me. And here I'm hearing a fiddle, and it sounded big as a house, and every note is like
real important and just it's fantastic.
Blues, he had great bluesy feel, and of course I find out later that's Kenny Baker playing with Bill Monroe.
That is fantastic.
And so I'm standing there, and Dad goes, "Well, do you want to go back in there and watch the show?" And I said, "Absolutely." So we walk back towards the front, and you can sit anywhere you want to because everybody's over at Ralph's. And so we sit in about the third row, and I parked myself right in front of Kenny Baker and watch Kenny Baker play the fiddle, and I'm like, I got to do that right there.
That is fantastic.
I have to do what that guy's doing. I'm going to do everything.
Now, exactly how old were you? Do you remember?
Teenager.
So early teens,
mid-teens.
Oh,
I remember it that I was like 15 or 16.
Okay, I see.
But interestingly enough, these guys, historians who write about bluegrass and stuff, Tom Ewing, who's writing the book on Bill Monroe, and Tom Adler, who wrote the book on the Brown County Jamboree, came to the house and interviewed me for that and talked about my dad playing there and all that. And they, as these guys do, they have researched when that show was.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So we'll know.
They know. They know.
Yeah.
It's in the book. It'll be in the Bill Monroe book. And I think they say they have determined that I was 16 by then.
Ah, I see.
But I can remember going with my dad then, probably the next Sunday, to buy a fiddle of my own. We went to Indianapolis, and there was one music store open on a Sunday, which to find one open on a Sunday was odd. And we were actually going to a place called Arthur's, I think. And we went to Arthur's music store, and they had 2 fiddles. And the other thing was my dad by this time had bought me so many instruments because I kept saying,
"So you're getting
play that.
Yeah, right.
Now I want to play that.
Right.
Now I want to play this. A Fender Jaguar. Now an amp. Now Dad, I need an amp. Now Dad, I really need this fuzz tone and all because I'm really loving this Jimi Hendrix guy.
Yeah.
Dad was like, oh. By this time, Dad's thinking
You'll never.
You need to. And by this time,
cut your hair, son.
Exactly right. I think maybe you need to buy this because in the meantime,
I see. Yeah.
I had been given banjo lessons at a
okay.
music store in town, Gary Davis Music, and of course, if you talk about me being 13, that's 1968, 69. And so I was making $6 an hour, and I'm
fantastic.
Which, big
That's
money.
more than we make now.
Yeah, well, yeah. See there, I've gone backwards. I've regressed. And so I'd saved up enough money. I paid cash for my first car. So of course I live at home. I got nothing to spend money on except records.
Yeah.
And all that. And so Dad's, I said, boy, Dad, I really need you. And he said, I think you need to buy this one yourself. So I said, well, okay, just take me up there. So we go to Indianapolis and buy a fiddle, and they have 2 fiddles, and the one is like so obviously, and I have enough money for the one, and it is so obviously not as good as the
very expensive one.
So Dad kicks in the difference and says, pay me back when you can, and I probably never even did that, and we buy that fiddle, and I come home and start practicing 6 hours a day, and which I continued to do on the fiddle until I was almost 25. So every single day, I don't care if I had the flu or if we were on the road.
You were working it,
I 6 hours a day because I had decided, the way you do this is just exactly like if you were in school.
Yeah.
If you were working a job in a factory.
Yeah.
So
and being professional.
Roger Smith, who lived in our area, and I would go over to his house. He had played with Bill Monroe. He'd played fiddle and banjo with Bill Monroe. And so I went over to his house, and he'd never showed anybody anything on the fiddle and didn't know that he could.
Yeah.
He just played the fiddle, but he had showed a bunch of people how to play the banjo.
Okay.
But he thought, so I said, no, I really want to learn. I said, I'll stand there and watch you play, and we'll go through these tunes. And so I did that.
Do you find that some of those techniques and some of those very things exist in your playing right now today still?
I'll tell you where I was so lucky, Jim, was Roger Smith. And again, this is like Providence. That's as it was about the
leaving or sticking around. Yeah.
Yeah. If he hadn't opened with Uncle Pen, I'd have walked out.
Right.
And if we would have been 20 seconds later, I'd have never heard it.
Right.
Or if Kenny Baker would have been sick that day and he brought somebody else, I wouldn't have cared.
Right.
All those things had to there was talk about the stars align. Well, they align.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So the thing about Roger Smith that I learned from Roger Smith, and I used to tell him this all the time, was, and this was really great, and this is something that, with our curriculum that we're presenting to people on how to learn these tunes, the beauty of it was he knew all of the fingerings in the left hand. He had them all correctly.
Oh,
almost no fiddle players played.
That's fantastic.
And I told him over and over again, I said, Roger, the greatest thing was I never had to relearn fingerings. Now I changed my own because I have learned, which we're going to get into in the advanced part of stuff, about why I changed fingerings on certain things, and it'll help, because what it does, it makes it to where the changed part, which feel free to move ahead to a curriculum that covers this part. It makes it to where you are playing in tune, it will take care of intonation problems.
Absolutely,
in great
much like the upright technique as well, and thumb position, etc.
Same exact thing. It has to do with the shape of the hand. But the good part is, I never had to relearn fingerings, which I would have had to from almost.
But that one just very spectacular lesson. It's amazing how one piece of information can really change everything. Oh, yeah.
He did. And he knew to use the little finger, like a lot of fiddle players did fingerings that I would have had to relearn because really they were trying to avoid using the little finger. And he knew that little finger needs to be as strong as the other three.
Right, I see.
And so the way I went about that was, and again, I was
just use it a lot.
That's exactly right. And I think it helped me that I was older. I wasn't 6.
It was a strong finger too, right?
I'd done a bunch of it in the guitar, and then too, I was always in my mind, the way I always did every instrument was, okay, now I'm playing the fiddle, so I'm going to invent my own exercises and drills. I'm not just going to play a song. I'm going to come up with ways to practice bow control, and by bow control I mean also which part of the bow you're using, and how to have complete control over the stick, and the same with the left hand, which was how to build up that left hand. Build up the left hand, how to set up the frame, which is the index finger and the little finger frame, and then how to maneuver around on the instrument, and again,
stay within
with the curriculum. It's something
that's fantastic.
It revolutionizes everybody's playing. Who when I show them this, it's like, oh my gosh, because it opens up all the stuff up the neck, and it gives you a logical way to get up the neck and then down the neck. But I was always looking for ways to practice.
Yeah, well, Glenn, this is really going to be good stuff for the people. What I'd like to, I'd like for us to go on so we can we'll let the listeners, if they would, subscribe to your YouTube channel.
Sir.
And if they'll do that, they'll get the updates regularly, and we'll also start adding curriculum. But what we'll do in our next editions is we're going to add, there's a lot more to the history that's really good stuff, and then there's some really good funny stories we're going to get to. But the best part is when we get to start teaching some folks all about bluegrass and all about being a professional studio musician.
Exactly.
So again, if we'll just get you you viewers to click subscribe, you'll see Glenn's updates, and we'd sure appreciate it.
Yes, sir. I look forward to seeing you.
Yeah.